881. Domineering Practice. During the first half-month of Gongyi and Luffy's training in the forest, they were beaten to the ground by various beasts almost every day. Although they both chose a beast, it didn't mean that other beasts wouldn't attack. The beast that Gongyi chose is even more, it is only the mother's, and has a family. Whenever Gongyi comes to practice, the little one will come to protect the mother, and the male will protect the mother and the little one. The original 1-on-1 turned into a daily 1-on-3, and Riley thought it was good. It is true that the first half-month of Gongyi was very difficult. But also because of the pressure, Gongyi went to bed early and got up early every day, and practiced hard. After just half a month, Gongyi has been able to force a little master observation hockey and armament hockey. The arrogance of seeing and hearing is equivalent to predicting, and can know the movements of Akatsuki's enemies in advance. Although Gongyi was not a particularly skilled master in the early stage, he was able to evade the attacks of beasts. Although it was only an individual attack, it was already a great improvement. And Luffy is not too ideal. Half a month has passed, observation hockey has not been able to use it once, just relying on armament hockey and beasts to fight hard. Although it was a bit embarrassing to be beaten, it also helped Luffy a lot. At least Luffy is stronger now than before. Half a month later, although they still couldn't beat the beast they had chosen. But with the combined efforts of two people, they are able to defeat individual small beasts. At least 3 meals a day are not to worry about. Rayleigh only said that the two of them couldn't work together to defeat the beast, but he didn't say that they couldn't work together to catch food. After they caught the food, they shared it with Rayleigh, not proud. This made Riley very happy and relaxed. 1 month later, Luffy was able to master the domineering of 2 colors. After 3 months have passed, both Luffy and Gongyi have been able to use domineering skillfully. But because their domineering is still unstable, they can't kill the beast, and the beast is still a level higher than them. Rayleigh's life is still teaching Luffy and Gongyi in the morning, sleeping in the afternoon, and waiting for dinner at night, but it's quite leisurely. After half a year has passed, Luffy and Gongyi have improved in their domineering training and can defeat the beasts. Although it's not great, it's not a second, but it's progress. After getting along for half a year, they also have feelings for the beast. The beasts also have a heart, and they know that Luffy and Gongyi are just practicing, and they won't hurt them. They are also close to Gongyi and Luffy, and occasionally help Luffy and Gongyi catch dinner together. That Gongyi face the right beast's house is not going to make trouble, but the beast he fought against became the male beast, and the mother and child cuddled together, waiting for the end of the male to go home together. But Gongyi is a little bit bad. Was cultivating, he would be able to see a family of 3 showing affection and love from time to time when he was resting, and he had to eat dog food for cultivation, which was really frustrating. A year has passed, and Luffy and Gongyi are completely able to unleash the domineering arrogance of seeing and armed at will. Their proficiency in domineering is now no less than that of Rayleigh, and even Rayleigh was extremely shocked to see the results of the two people's cultivation. It took only 1 year for the two to overcome the first and second hurdles. Rayleigh also thought that they might only learn sightseeing and armament hockey in 2 years. It seems that he underestimated Luffy and Gongyi. That being the case, what they will do next is undoubtedly the cultivation of Conqueror's hockey. This whole year, Rayleigh barely mentioned the Overlord sex, and Gongyi also knew that it was because they didn't have the ability to cultivate Overlord sex. So I have been working hard, and now I can finally get in touch with the domineering arrogance of the Overlord. Today happened to be the day when they had been practicing for a year. On this day, Rayleigh carefully explained the domineering power of the Overlord and the cultivation method to the two of them. The method of cultivating Conqueror's hockey is similar to cultivating sight, seeing, and armament hockey. They are all exercises in which the use of fruit abilities is not allowed in the early stage. But the training of Conqueror's hockey is more unbearable than the sight and the armed. The requirements given by Rayleigh are: not allowed to use seeing color and armament hockey, not allowed to use fruit ability, and also not allowed to do anything with beasts. The only solution is to defeat the opponent with Conqueror's Haki. To put it simply, it is staring at the beasts to see who can stare to death. Because the beasts became friends with them, Rayleigh also communicated with the beasts, saying that you are welcome, just fight as before. Then Luffy and Gongyi only have two moves that can be used. One is Conqueror's Haki, and the other is Evasion. Rayleigh is not cruel enough to let Luffy and Gongyi to Conqueror's Haki, Hyuk stand still to use Conqueror's Haki. That's the case, if the master is not good at Conqueror's Haki, it will be beaten standing up and beaten lying down. Although this practice was difficult, Luffy and Gongyi did not give up, and worked hard. While cultivating, the two were also prepared to be beaten. 882. 2 years. Gongyi was right at all. In the first half month of their practice, the two of them were only beaten, and no matter how hard they stared, they couldn't use Conqueror's Haki. But Luffy's head is not too smart. He can't think so much, he just hides and finds a chance to release Conqueror's Haki. Originally, the two of them were able to evade attacks, which was already a great advantage, but they only knew when they actually fought. Because their attention is divided into two parts, one is dodging, and the other is trying to free Conqueror's Haki. Result, no matter who they are in trouble. You can't escape, you can't escape, you can't release it. In the end, Gongyi and Luffy simply gave up and gave up dodging. Even if the beast came, they still carried it, only in this way could they find a chance to release Conqueror's Haki. 4. Luffy, after all, Luffy is a rubber man, this kind of attack doesn't hurt or itch. But Gongyi was not so lucky. Every time he was beaten, it really hit his body, and every time he was beaten, Gongyi was exhausted. After a week passed, Gongyi couldn't hold on anymore. Wasn't that he didn't want to persevere, but that he was forcibly dragged by Rayleigh not to let him practice, and to cultivate for a few days. Looking at Gongyi's body covered with injuries, he struggled to walk, and he was afraid that his life would be lost as he continued to practice. Gongyi had no choice but to sit with Rayleigh, watching Luffy practice while trying to free his Conqueror's Haki. You're thinking too much about Conqueror's Haki. Just when Gongyi was racking his brains and couldn't think of anything, Rayleigh said on the side. When Rayleigh said this, Gongyi turned to look at Rayleigh, wondering what Rayleigh meant. You think Conqueror's Haki is very rare, and you desperately want to release it, but no matter what, you can't release it, right? Rayleigh did not look at Gongyi, but closed his eyes, enjoying the sun, and asked. Yes. Gongyi thought for a while, and it seemed that it was indeed the case. Rayleigh chuckled. He knew that he couldn't be wrong, and then said, Conqueror's Haki is different from the armed color of the knowledge. He is a part of your body that was born, grew up together, and is no different from your flesh and blood. Don't overthink it, it's yours, and it's released whenever you want. After listening to Rayleigh's words, Gongyi was silent. Into a moment of thought. What Rayleigh said was absolutely right. Gongyi really thought it was too much trouble for the domineering of the Overlord. For a while, Gongyi seemed to have realized that. He stopped making a sound, sat on the spot, held his chin, closed his eyes, and began to think. Seeing that Gongyi didn't make a sound, he opened one eye to look at Gongyi, and finally let out a smile, and continued to close his eyes to bask in the sun. Gongyi's thinking time was not short, and after thinking for 10 minutes, Gongyi opened his eyes again. Still, can't you? Gongyi looked at the neighborhood that had not changed at all, and sighed. In fact, the moment he opened his eyes, Gongyi began to try to release Conqueror's Haki, but it seemed that he failed again. No, look here. Just when Gongyi was disappointed, Rayleigh said. Then point to somewhere on the ground. Gongyi looked in Rayleigh's direction and saw a bug that seemed to be dead, lying motionless on the ground. This is. Gongyi can understand Rayleigh's thoughts. Show him what the bug is doing, you did it. Rayleigh is not too long-winded, 3 words will make it clear. When Rayleigh said this, Gong Yi suddenly realized, did I successfully release Conqueror's Haki? Gong Yi was a little excited and couldn't believe it was true. Riley didn't deny it, but nodded. Is it the same before? It's not that it wasn't released, but the power is too small, I didn't find it. The release of Conqueror's Haki was successful this time, making Gong Yi not. Can't think of it before. Conqueror's Haki countless times, and there have been such releases, but he doesn't notice the details. No, only this time, I also have Conqueror's Haki. If you release it successfully, I will feel it, but your cultivation level is not enough, you can't feel the slight power, continue to cultivate, there will be progress. Riley got up, patted the dust on his body, and explained to Gong Yi. After that, Rayleigh didn't say anything, turned around and walked behind his back. After a year of getting along, Gong Yi also understands Rayleigh's thinking behavior, probably going to take a nap. After a successful release, Gong Yi's idea of continuing to struggle aroused. Although he is covered in injuries now, he cannot go to training with beasts, he can only meditate here. But meditation is also good, and it is still rewarding, at least it allows him to successfully release his domineering. But what he couldn't figure out was the domineering he unleashed in Marin Vando that time. How did he do it that time with enough power to make anyone below him faint? Gong Yi couldn't remember the feeling that time, so he could only continue to think hard. 883. Respective time, third more. The way to practice Conqueror's Haki, Gong Yi took a month to realize, and Luffy took 2 months to realize. Because Luffy is slightly inferior to Gong Yi, Luffy worked hard in the later period, and the two of them almost never let anyone else. But after 2 years, Luffy still couldn't beat Luffy in the competition the day before he left the forest. Luffy wasn't annoyed either, and left the following words to Gong Yi. Next time, I will definitely surpass you. The two made an oath to fistfight, and there will be a competition in the future. Luffy and Gong Yi stayed in the forest. For 2 full years, the forest was successfully changed, and almost all the beasts surrendered to Gong Yi and Luffy. But this also caused all the small beasts to see Luffy and Gong Yi running. The big beasts are friends and can't eat. The last week, they almost came here by eating wild fruits, which was bitter for Luffy, who loves meat. Gong Yi is okay, can adapt to the environment. Rayleigh is not picky about food, it seems that Luffy is the only one suffering. On the day when the training ended, Gong Yi and Luffy came out of the forest, and they hadn't come out to see the outside environment for a long time. Although they sometimes sit on the tree and observe the outside, they never come out to feel the convenience. Luffy, the concubine finally waited for you to come out. Come and eat the food prepared for you. When Luffy and Gong Yi came out, the first thing they saw was the Empress. Since the day Luffy entered, the Empress has carved pictures on the nearby stones to count the days, and specially prepared a lot of food this morning to supplement Luffy's nutrition. Gong Yi and Rayleigh are also included. But after all, the Empress's whole heart is on Luffy's body, and the food prepared for Gong Yi and Rayleigh is naturally not as much as Luffy's. Wow, meaty meat. Thank you, Hancock. Luffy saw the meat piled up in front of him, his saliva instantly drooled to the ground, and he immediately threw himself on the meat and started a sweeping sweep. Hancock, Hancock. Of Luffy calling the Empress's name echoed in the Empress's heart, unable to dissipate for a long time, so the Empress shyly ran away to prepare for Luffy's leap. Seeing the Empress running away quickly, Gong Yi smiled helplessly and started eating the food in front of him. By the time they all finished eating, the Empress Faye and Gong Yi had already packed up. This is for the two of you on the way. We have prepared a lot of meat, clothes, and water. Front of Luffy and Gong Yi and said. Lee for Luffy himself. But he thought about it later. Gong Yi is also a brother of Luffy, and it is impossible to prepare for it, so he still prepares less for Gong Yi. But Gong Yi looked at the big package in front of him, shook his head, and said, Thank you for your kindness, but I think I'm going to say goodbye to you here. What, Gong Yi? Be my partner, okay. When Luffy heard that Gong Yi was leaving, he immediately ate the remaining meat in front of him and said to Gong Yi. He and Gong Yi have been together for 2 years. No matter what, he naturally wants Gong Yi to be able to walk with him. No, Luffy, we all have our own dreams, and I also want to be the Pirate King, so let's see you next time in the New World. Gong Yi shook his head, looked at Luffy with a smile, and declined his invitation. Although Gong Yi also likes Luffy very much, it is a pity that the purpose of his coming here is to be One Piece. Okay, but, One Piece must be mine. See you in the New World. Gong Yi's rejection. Luffy didn't force it, Gong Yi, but he still swore overbearingly that One Piece was his. Gong Yi just smiled and didn't answer. Luffy, the ship is ready, we should go. Just as Rayleigh, Gong Yi and Luffy were joking, the Empress walked over from one side and pointed to the ship at sea. This is the ship of the Empress family, and it is also specially prepared by the Empress for Luffy. Oh, thank you, then we'll go first, we'll see you later. Luffy jumped aboard and said to Rayleigh and Gong Yi. Because Luffy can't drive a boat, the Empress sent Luffy to the Chambord Islands this time. Goodbye. Gong Yi also smiled and said goodbye to Luffy, looking forward to seeing you next time. Just like that, Rayleigh and Gong Yi watched Luffy's ship gradually disappear on the horizon. Gong Yi, this is back to you. When Luffy left, Rayleigh took something out of himself and handed it to Gong Yi. That's right, it's the devil fruit that Gong Yi found at the naval base. When cultivating, Gong Yi was afraid that he would lose the fruit, so he gave it to Rayleigh, hoping that Rayleigh would help to keep it. In fact, if Rayleigh hadn't said it, he would have forgotten about it himself. This fruit, I am very curious about what ability he has. Gong Yi nodded, took the devil fruit from Rayleigh's hand, and thought. This is the thundering fruit, which can be said to be a fruit with a strong nature. While Gong Yi was thinking, Rayleigh looked at the dark blue devil fruit in Gong Yi's hand and said. 884. Mayor returns. After hearing Riley's words, Gong Yi was taken aback for a moment, and then he wanted to ask why Riley knew. In fact, when Rayleigh first saw this fruit, he felt familiar, but he couldn't remember it. After all, he was old. Although he had seen the fruit illustrated book, he had almost forgotten it, and he didn't remember it until a few days ago. Gong Yi nodded after hearing what Rayleigh said, but was still surprised. Surprised him was not that Rayleigh knew the fruit, but the fruit itself. Raining Thunder Fruit, isn't it the fruit of Anilu on the empty island in the original plot of One Piece? Gong Yi still remembers that Anilu was shot by Luffy and didn't die, but what happened? This fruit actually reappeared in the world. But in any case, the conclusion that can be drawn is that Aniluo is dead. What are you going to do next? Riley sat on the ground, took a sip of wine, and asked Gong Yi. Gong Yi refused Luffy's request, that is to say, now that he is the only one left, where to go next is a question that Rayleigh is very concerned about. According to the agreement, I will wait for Mayor here for 3 days. After 3 days, if Mayor comes back, I will take him to the Chambord Islands. If he does not come back, I will borrow a boat here and go to the water capital. Gong Yi looked at Riley and said. But Riley didn't ask why. In fact, Gong Yi's idea, Rayleigh is also basically clear. If Mayor chooses to come back, then there will be a boatman on his pirate ship, so he doesn't have to go to the water capital to buy a boat, but to the large auction house in the Chambord Islands. Because if Mayor comes back, they will be. There are boatmen, but there is no good pirate ship. Go to the Chambord Islands to find Adam. The trunk of the tree is fine. In Roger's ship and Luffy's ship are the trunks of the Adam tree. But if Mayor doesn't come back, he will give up the idea of building a good boat for the time being, but go to the water capital to buy a boat first, and then continue to gather people. But wherever you go, it's a problem. Now Gong Yi only has a compass to record, and where he will go next, he can only follow the fate. If you go to the Chambord Islands, come with me. If you are in the water capital, there is no permanent record of the compass, you can only rely on luck. Rayleigh looked at Gong Yi and said. Gong Yi also nodded, without refusing. Because what Rayleigh said is very reasonable, there is no permanent record compass, everything can only be random. You go to the Chambord Islands, there is a life card to guide you. In this way, Gong Yi and Rayleigh stayed in the daughter country for another 3 days. In the early morning of the third day, Gong Yi sighed, for Mayor, his partner, he still hoped to join him. But it has been 3 days now, and as promised, Mayor has not come back. Seemed that Mayor was not coming back. Looks like we're parting here. Rayleigh looked at the calm sea level and said with a smile. Gong Yi just smiled and nodded, regretting that he couldn't win over Meyer. However, just when Gong Yi was about to go to the Empress to ask for another boat, and left with Rayleigh, a voice came from behind him, calling his name. After hearing the voice, Gong Yi's eyes lit up and he turned around quickly. On the other side of the voice, a small boat can be seen in the distance. When the boat is getting closer, Gong Yi can see clearly that it is Meyer. After seeing Meyer, Gong Yi is undoubtedly extremely excited. Meyer, his first buddy, is back. It's been a long time waiting for you. After Meyer docked the boat, Gong Yi stepped forward and put one hand on Meyer's shoulder and said with a smile. There was an accident on the way back and the money was almost stolen. Meyer smiled awkwardly. When he was rushing here, he happened to meet a pirate ship. The people on that ship wanted to sink Meyer's ship and rob Meyer's treasure, and finally Meyer used his abilities to create more cannons. Because of his ability to absorb materials nearby, the shells on the pirate ship naturally came to him. Although the entanglement has been a long time, fortunately, I have kept my boat and money. But Gong Yi just didn't understand how much money can make Meyer desperately protect. He couldn't help but ask, why not run first? Here is 500 million Bailey. In the past 2 years, I have been a bounty hunter for a short time, killing some little pirates. If I am lucky, I can find some treasures. In the end, the pirate ship that robbed me had a full 300 million. I brought back Bailey. Meyer pointed to his own boat of boxes and said, 500 million. Are you not afraid of being targeted by collecting so many Baileys? When Gong Yi heard the number of Baileys, he was instantly surprised. In just 2 years, Meyer had so many Baileys. And there seems to be a gap between Meyer now and before. After changing the prison uniform and dressing up, it can be seen that Meyer's appearance is not low. If you look closely, he is a handsome guy. I think our pirate group has just been established and may need money to buy a boat, so we went to search Bailey and help the captain. Meyer looked at Gong Yi and said with a smile. 885. To the Chambord Islands. After Meyer finished speaking, Gong Yi was instantly moved. Unexpectedly, in the 2 years since Meyer left, he has been thinking about himself all the time. Thank you, Meyer, we're off to Chambord, looking for Adam's tree. Gong Yi patted Meyer on the shoulder and said with a smile. Wait a minute, Captain, what's the name of our pirate group? When he was about to leave, Meyer asked. During the past 2 years, what Meyer is most looking forward to is to come back here and meet Gong Yi again. He really wants to know what the name of the pirate ship he is on is. Name, it's called the Fire Pirates. Gong Yi thought again and said. This name is very meaningful. When Gong Yi started here, it was in Marin Vando, and the one thing he regretted the most was not being able to save Ace. So he put a lot of effort into the name. The name is the Fire Pirates. One is to commemorate Ace's death, and the other is to hope that their pirates will be able to live and breathe like fire. The Fire Pirates. Good name, Sea Captain. Meyer pondered over the name, knelt down on one knee to Gong Yi excitedly, and smiled happily. Gong Yi also smiled and nodded, pulling Gong Yi up. Future, the Fire Pirates who set off one storm after another in the New World were born. Then let's go, Chambord. Rayleigh looked at Gong Yi and Meyer, smiled and said. Gong Yi and Meyer nodded, and the three got on the same boat. A new journey is about to begin. Because the Chambord Islands were neither near nor far from the daughter country, the three of them took several days to return to the Chambord Islands. By the time they reached the Chambord Islands, the three of them were already starving. It's a long story to ask why. The food the Empress prepared was not too much, the three of them only ate for 4 days, and one day they were completely hungry, so when they arrived at the Chambord Islands, a few people were already too hungry. And by the time they reached the Chambord Islands, Luffy and his party had already left. Of Luffy that almost all the islands are in turmoil and people are panicking. The Tianlong people also hid in their own homes and could not escape, for fear of attacking themselves. People still resist pirates and fear in the bottom of their hearts. There is a trace of emotion, but they are still grateful. Because of Luffy's appearance, they all hid, which also allowed them to walk outside with confidence. After getting on the boat, Gung-Yi felt that the hat on his head was too hot and wanted to take it off. "You've been in the newspaper too, keep your head covered." Rayleigh saw that Gung-Yi was about to take off his hat. He immediately turned back and buttoned Gung-Yi's hat on him, preventing him from taking it off. For Rayleigh's words, Gung-Yi was speechless for a while. Wasn't he just being offered a bounty? No, but Gung-Yi didn't. No, he has a close relationship with Luffy, which will make the Tianlong people take their anger on him, through him find Luffy. Although Gung-Yi didn't know what Rayleigh was going to do, he still obediently obeyed and followed him back to the store with his hat on. After returning to the store, Riley prepared some food for Mayor and Gung-Yi, and the three began to discuss the Chambord Islands auction. "Teacher, when will this auction start?" Gung-Yi took a bite of the meat and asked Riley. Because Rayleigh took him to practice for 2 years, he still called the teacher out of respect. "You go to the auction, what do you want?" Riley took a sip of wine and asked rhetorically. He was very curious. Gung-Yi went all the way to the Chambord Islands. What kind of boat was he going to buy? And the auction house here really doesn't sell boats. "Adam." Gung-Yi didn't hide it, and answered Rayleigh's question honestly. He didn't explain to Raleigh what Adam was, because he believed that, with Raleigh's resume, no explanation was needed. "Adam, is it a boat?" Rayleigh smiled, and talking about Adam is also a story. He still remembered the first big ship he and Roger sailed with. Their first pirate ship, the one that accompanied them through countless storms, was made of Adam. But when I was looking for Adam, it took a lot of effort. I remember that Roger had a fight with another man who wanted Adam's trunk, and whoever won would take Adam's trunk. Roger was a very honest promise, and finally won. But the man felt bad. He was about to run away with Adam in his arms, and they chased after him for a long time before they found Adam back. Thinking about going to sea with Roger back then, it was also a very unforgettable experience. "Well, it's a pirate ship. I think there should be Adam in the auction here." Gung-Yi nodded and replied. Auction house he knew was the large auction in the Chambord Islands. For the rest of the auctions, he really doesn't know where they are. As for whether there is any here, he also has a possible mentality to try it. If she didn't, there was nothing she could do. There may be, but the auction house has stopped and it will take a few days. Riley said helplessly. Because Luffy reappeared, the auction house was temporarily closed for a while, fearing that its own interests would be harmed. 886. Tianlong people, second more. Because of the renovation of the auction house, Gung-Yi and Mayor have to stay here for a few days, and when the auction house returns to normal, they can go to see if there is any Adam trunks. Gung-Yi remembered the dock where Rayleigh was, number 49, and then went out shopping with Mayor. Although he had seen the Chambord archipelago before, when he was here, he still felt incredible. Luffy and the others are probably on Mermaid Island right now. When the ship is built, they don't plan to go to Mermaid Island, and they still have to follow the fate where they will go next. This time Gung-Yi and Mayor came out, mainly to buy some materials needed for shipbuilding. They are not stupid either. It is impossible to build a ship with only one trunk, that is the trunk of the ship. Let's split up next. I don't know much about shipbuilding, so the materials are handed over to you, and I'll go buy food and furniture. Gong Yi and Mayer walked to a fork and said. Mayer did not refuse, nodded, and the two separated at the intersection. If two people are together, the progress will be very slow, so it is better to act separately. After Gong Yi and Mayer separated, Gong Yi chose to pre-order furniture first. They haven't found a chef yet, and the food can only buy some finished products that have been stored for a longer time. Although Gong Yi can cook a little bit, but the taste can be said to be very general, so let's eat these for the time being. Hurry up, what are you dawdling about? Just when Gong Yi was shopping for furniture, he suddenly heard a loud noise in front of him. I saw 444-day dragon men walking forward with a girl tied with iron chains. Everyone saw the Tianlong people, they wanted to hide away, and some even closed their doors. The girl who was chained by the Tianlong people was very revealing, and could only cover the part that should be covered. The whip wounds on her body were visible to the naked eye. At this moment, a child with ice cream crossed in front of the Tianlong people. Pedestrians who saw this scene were stunned. Where is the wild boy from? How dare you cross and block my way? The Tianlong people looked at the children in the ground with disdain on their faces and said. Saying that, he pulled a gun out of his clothes and wanted to attack the child. This Tianlong person, Gong Yi is all too familiar with it, this is not the same. Tianlongren who was beaten by Luffy did not expect not only to stop after being beaten, but even worse than before. Lord Tianlongren, we were reckless. The child is still young and ignorant. Please, let her go. Just when the Tianlong people were about to shoot, a woman came out from the side, holding her child, her eyes were full of fear. The woman undoubtedly made the Tianlong people even more angry. Where are the pariahs who came out of here? Are you worthy of talking to me? We are God's descendants. You dare to disobey God. The Tianlong people looked at the child holding the woman, their eyes widened with anger, and their voices were raised several decibels. Woman was so frightened by the Tianlong people that she trembled all over, and the child cried out in the woman's arms. Noisy. The Tianlong people were disturbed by the cry of the child, and their anger rose to the extreme again. Seeing that the child angered the Tianlong people, the woman kept touching the child's head and comforting the child. Die. That was about to drip into his mouth, and then pulled the trigger. Although the woman and child were weeping in front of him, he showed no mercy. In his eyes, everyone is an ant, and killing someone is just like stepping on an ant to death. After one shot passed, he was still not relieved, and fired more than 10 shots in a row. Just when the bullet was about to hit the woman and the child, Gong Yi jumped over quickly. With observation hockey, it's easy to catch these bullets. Just 1 second, all the bullets appeared in Gong Yi's hand, and he threw it to the ground with a crisp sound. The passers-by who were kneeling on the side had only this crisp voice in their ears, and they were too scared to make a sound. This man actually disobeyed the Tianlong people, and he was similar to Luffy at the beginning. You, livestock still want to rebel and fail. Seeing that all his bullets were stopped, Tianlongren pointed at Gong Yi and asked angrily. In his eyes, Gong Yi is just a domestic animal, and what Gong Yi is doing now, in his eyes, is a rebellion. Livestock. Gong Yi looked at the Tianlong people with dark eyes, and walked towards the Tianlong people. Who has always insisted on justice, was very angry when he saw Tianlong people bullying innocent people, and now he listened to Tianlong people's words, and his face was even more obscure. You stop, let you stop, don't you hear? Just as Gong Yi walked towards the Tianlong people panicked and ordered desperately. He was pampered and raised since he was a child, and because of Luffy's incident, there was a shadow, and he was naturally panicked. But Gong Yi didn't listen to what the Tianlong people said at all, as if he didn't hear anything, he continued to walk in the direction of the Tianlong people. 887. The Girl Who Was Rescued, Third More. That day, when the Dragon Man saw that Gong Yi was not listening to his own words, he froze again, he shot, trying to make Gong Yi stop. Of the Tianlong people were all taken by Gong Yi one by one as before, and they didn't hurt him one bit. Hit me. Gong Yi looked at the panic look of the Tianlong Ren, and then at his fastest speed, he almost teleported to the Tianlong Ren. Next second, Gong Yi tore off the onion-like headgear on the Tianlong Ren's head, and one. The hood hit the Tianlong Ren's face, and then smashed the headgear on the Tianlong Ren's face. Let his nose bleed. Cousin. That day, Longren's sister saw that her cousin was knocked unconscious again, and immediately ran to her cousin's side, throwing away the chain that tied the woman in a panic. Don't you know what kind of existence we are? You dare to attack us, are you tired of living? Woman looked at Gong Yi with vicious eyes in her eyes. What kind of existence exists like a lackey? Gong Yi didn't feel that he had done anything he shouldn't have done, and continued to stir up the flames and humiliate the Tianlong people. The woman heard Gong Yi's words, her face turned pale for a while. She usually calls other people's lackeys. When has she ever suffered this humiliation? Run. The admiral is coming, run. Just as Gong Yi confronted the woman, people on the streets started running to the side in a panic. Looking at Gong Yi, it was like seeing the plague. He dared not approach him for fear of being implicated. But the mother and son who were rescued by Gong Yi did not run away. They are still kind, and they are more worried about Gong Yi's safety than themselves. After all, it is because of them that Gong Yi is in this predicament. Young man, let's go, the admiral is coming, we can't drag you down. Woman was holding the child, her expression full of fear, but she still spoke. Their mother and daughter made mistakes, and they didn't want Gong Yi to be implicated. Anyway, offending the Tianlong people is a dead word both horizontally and vertically. Now that Gong Yi has taught the Tianlong people a lesson for their mother and son, she is very happy. Let her bear all the next sins. You go first, find a place to escape, don't get caught, don't worry about me. Gong Yi shook his head, did not leave, and spoke in a voice that only the two of them could hear. Of the mother and daughter being in trouble than himself. This woman looked at Gong Yi, her eyes filled with hesitation. She did not dare to leave. I know what the end is, don't worry, let us go, you still have to take care of the children. Seeing that the woman hadn't left, Gong Yi said with a bit of anger in his voice. Gong Yi said this, the woman instantly became sober, but after hesitating, she still carried the child and ran away. Yes, she still has a child to take care of and can't give up this child. After watching the woman and the child run away, Gong Yi was relieved. Come on, where's the navy, where are they all dead? Just after the mother and daughter ran away, the woman of the dragon man looked at the road and shouted. There was impatience and disgust in the language and expressions. If it wasn't for the fact that they needed the navy now, he really wanted to tear those navies into pieces, and no one could be seen at the critical moment. Not long after the woman shouted, the navy troops surrounded the place, protecting the Tianlong people behind them. Protect the Tianlong people. The navy looked at the stunned Tianlong people, swallowed, stared at Gong Yi, and shouted. The navy can be said to be cautious now, for fear that if the Tianlong people are unhappy, their own lives will not be guaranteed. Play by yourself. Gong Yi looked at these embarrassed people, didn't want to say anything, turned around and ran away. But just as he was about to leave, he glanced at the girl on the ground. It was the girl who was bound by the Tianlong people. Because the Tianlong people are in a mess now, they let go of this girl for a while. Gong Yi didn't want to go by himself for a while, so he jumped to the side, picked up the girl, and left here together. At the moment of leaving, the eyes of the Tianlong people met the eyes of the girl, and then avoided it. What are you doing? Girl was picked up by Gong Yi. She was a little frightened and started struggling. To save you. Gong Yi was a little uncomfortable being thumped by the girl, and replied, then holding the girl's hand tighter to prevent the girl from struggling. The girl's eyes were full of unease and apprehension, but she still stopped, no longer struggling, and quietly stayed in Gong Yi's arms. Gong Yi didn't dare to linger for a moment, and took the girl to Raleig's place. Because Gong Yi hasn't forgotten, the girl still wears a collar that can explode at any time. This thing, he can't open it. If it doesn't open well, it will explode directly. So all he can do is take the girl back and let Rayleigh unlock it. As for whether they can get there, it depends on luck. The switch is in Tianlongren's hands. I hope he can take the girl back before Tianlongren wakes up. Otherwise, both of them may suffer. Thinking of this, Gong Yi increased his speed again and ran towards the 49th dock. 888. The ambush of the Tianlong people. Gong Yi and the girl arrived at dock number 49. The collar on the girl's neck still did not explode. Even so, Gong Yi still didn't dare to relax. Immediately. Take the girl to Rayleigh's. Teacher. Gong Yi ran to Rayleigh's side, put the girl on the ground, gasping for breath, unable to speak. What's the matter? Gong Yi's tired look. Rayleigh squinted and asked with a smile. Gong Yi was too tired to speak. He just raised his finger and pointed at the girl, and then he was still breathing heavily. This little girl's neck, did you let me take this apart? Rayleigh looked in the direction Gong Yi pointed and saw the collar on the girl. Seeing that Rayleigh understood what he meant, Gong Yi immediately gave a thumbs up and nodded, indicating that he was right. Rayleigh didn't refuse either, stroked his beard and walked towards the girl. But the girl looked at Rayleigh, still a little afraid of strangers, and couldn't help but take a few steps back. Strange people, unfamiliar surroundings, everything makes the girl so weak. Don't be afraid, it won't hurt you. Rayleigh smiled and said. Then Rayleigh walked over to the girl and grabbed the collar. After the collar was caught, the girl closed her eyes in fear. But the warning sound and explosion she expected didn't come. In the next second, the collar on the girl was cracked with a click, and was thrown outside by Rayleigh. After the collar flew out, it exploded in the air. The girl looked at the exploding collar, her heart terrified. If the explosion happened to her, she would probably die without a whole body. Thank you, at herself without the collar, and felt extremely relaxed for a while, and thanked Gong Yi and Rayleigh carefully. You're welcome, put this on. After the girl thanked, before Rayleigh and Gong Yi spoke, Shachi walked out with a dress and handed it to the girl. After all, the girl's clothes are very revealing, and what has just happened, now that the clothes are almost broken, it's not bad to give her a dress. Girl nodded, then followed Sha into the room and changed into that dress. After changing clothes, Shachi also helped the girl wipe her messy hair. The girl looked at herself in the mirror with mixed feelings. For at least 10 years, she hasn't worn clothes so normally. Because of the special hobbies of the Tianlong people, she was forced to wear those unsightly clothes. After changing clothes, Shachi walked out with the girl. Gong Yi looked at the girl, his eyes lit up. She was also a very pure girl. What's your name? Where is your home? I'll take you home. Gong Yi sat in the chair, looked at the girl, and asked. So-called helping people to the end, sending Buddhas to the West, Gong Yi is just that kind of person. He didn't worry about the girl leaving by himself. If he met the Tianlong people again, was caught, and went back, it would be bad. My name is Lan Ying, home. I don't have a home anymore. When talking about her own home, Lan Ying's eyes dimmed for a while, and then she replied. When Lan Ying said this, Gong Yi didn't know what to say for a while, and was a little embarrassed. Sorry. Gong Yi scratched his head in embarrassment, and stabbed at the sore spot. Lan Ying shook her head and said it was okay. I have friends at Dock 6, can you take me there? There was a trace of unease in Lan Ying's words, and asked. Gong Yi didn't hesitate at all, just nodded and said yes. Then let's go now. Now that he has a place to go, Gong Yi doesn't leave Lan Ying too much. After all, being trapped by Tianlong people for so long, he must miss his friends. I'll go with you. Just as Gong Yi was about to leave, Rayleigh said with a smile behind him. Gong Yi looked at Rayleigh, said nothing, and nodded. And Shachi stayed here and continued to look at the store. Just like that, Rayleigh, Gong Yi, and Lan Ying 3 started to go to dock number 6. During their journey from number 49 to number 6 dock, it was unusually quiet. As usual, the Tianlong people were beaten, and now the Chambord Islands should be all navy. But now the Chambord Islands are quiet and uncomfortable, and even the inhabitants are missing. It's so quiet. Gong Yi looked around, empty shops, empty roads, and closed residential houses. After Gong Yi said this, Lan Ying tightened her hand holding the clothes, smiled awkwardly, and replied, yes. Yes. Rayleigh looked at Gong Yi and Lan Ying, just squinted and continued to walk forward without saying anything, almost silent all the way. In this way, several people successfully arrived at the 6th dock. However, what they didn't expect was that the people in the Navy are now all in the 6th dock. After Gong Yi and others arrived, the Navy immediately surrounded Gong Yi, Rayleigh, and Lan Ying, and there were still a lot of people. Looking at the situation, Gong Yi secretly screamed badly, and it seemed that he couldn't escape. 889. Lan Ying's difficulties. And at the next moment, the 2 Tianlong people who were beaten walked out from the center of the Navy. Ha ha ha, Lan Ying, well done, take those 2 to me. The woman pushed her cousin who was sitting in a wheelchair, looked at Lan Ying, and said with a smile. When Tianlongren's words fell, Gong Yi turned his head. Looking at Lan Ying, his eyes were full of incomprehensible feelings. Lan Ying didn't look away, didn't look at Gong Yi, just whispered, I'm sorry. Next second, Lan Ying turned around and inserted the medicine from the 2 syringes into Gong Yi and Rayleigh's bodies. Only 10 seconds later, Gong Yi and Rayleigh both fell to the ground. Take them away. I want to torture them, how can I easily kill them? The woman looked at the fallen Rayleigh and Gong Yi, and laughed uncontrollably, feeling that she had been enmity. And Lan Ying looked at the fallen Rayleigh and Gong Yi without saying a word, but was silently put on the collar again and followed behind the Tianlong people. In the Dragon Dungeon. The captured Rayleigh and Gong Yi were lying in the cell at this moment, while Lan Ying, sitting beside the 2, hugged her legs and said nothing. About half an hour later, Gong Yi slowly woke up. I got caught. Rayleigh looked at the surrounding environment and the collared people in other cages, and said with a smile. The people who were locked in the cage, not. Everyone can think like Gong Yi, they are basically crying, either crying or screaming, or holding their heads and hiding in the corner. It can be seen how they tortured the Tianlong people. I'm sorry. Gong Yi with his hands tied up and wearing a collar, and said. Gong Yi looked at Lan Ying who had put on the revealing clothes again, sat in front of her, and said, I'm sorry. It's useless, I want to know the reason more. Lan Ying looked at Gong Yi and bit her lip, not knowing what to do. It's okay to tell me, anyway. We're all locked up together. Seeing that Lan Ying didn't want to say anything, Gong Yi was not in a hurry, sitting on the ground and waiting patiently. After hesitating, Lan Ying lost to Gong Lian and said, My mother is also in their hands. I can't run, my mother will die. After speaking, Lan Ying couldn't help but started to cry. She couldn't count the number of times she had cried here, but for the sake of her mother, she could only endure it. Every time, God is used as a bait to abduct people who displease them, or people they are interested in. There were countless chances that she could run away, but her mother was still here and she couldn't. This is also the reason why the Tianlong people let her out with peace of mind every time. 10 years ago, at that time Lan Ying was still a child of a few years old. Like other children, she lived in Chambord. On the islands, live happily. Where they live is dock number 49, which is where Rayleigh is now. Dock number 49 is a place where Tianlong people almost never come, and the residents live with a little peace of mind. Who is young, doesn't know what Tianlong people are like, but only occasionally hears adults talk about it. However, on her 8th birthday, her mother took her out to play. Like the child rescued by Gong Yi today, she didn't understand any evil forces, and was happily maddening in the street. It was also like this, which caused her to bump into the Tianlong Ren, the man who tied her today. At that time, the Tianlong people were very angry and shot Lan Ying. At that time, no one came out to save them as bravely as Gong Yi. Lan Ying is also the first time to try the fear of death. When she was about to be shot, Lan Ying's mother Lan Yu helped her block the bullet. Also because of this, Lan Yu's left arm was injured. When Lan Ying saw that her mother was covered in blood, she naturally cried uncontrollably. Lan Yu said that he wanted to hear Lan Ying sing, and Lan Ying also sang a few words to Lan Yu very well. And it was these few songs that made Tianlong people interested in Lan Ying. Little girl, you come with me, be with your mother, be my slave, and I will spare your life, how about it? The Tianlongren smiled slyly, put down his gun, and asked Lan Ying with his big snot. Can you? As soon as Lan Ying heard that she and her mother were still alive, she turned her head and asked. The Tianlong man nodded, indicating that of course he could. The innocent Lan Ying chose to believe the words of the Tianlong people, and was put on a collar with her mother on the spot, and came to this prison-like cage. In this way, day after day, year after year, as long as the Tianlong people are in a good mood, they will take her out to sing, and they will sing. All day long. Tired, but at least alive. But now, she hasn't seen her mother for a long time. Not long ago, Tianlong told her that as long as she lured another person, she would be able to see her mother. At this time, Gong Yi also appeared, so Gong Yi became Lan Ying's target. 890. I can help you. In this way, Lan Ying, although she didn't want to, still started to attack Gong Yi. She was really worried about her mother. When Lan Ying was very young, her father disappeared, and until now, it was her mother who pulled her up. When the life of outsiders and her mother's life became multiple choice questions, Lan Ying undoubtedly chose to help the Tianlong people against her conscience. So now, Gong Yi and Rayleigh are caught here. Sure enough, I knew it. Gong Yi smiled and didn't mean to blame Lan Ying. But Lan Ying was overwhelmed by Gong Yi's words for a while. Because she couldn't understand what Gong Yi was saying. Teacher, do and sleep, the story is over, get up quickly. Gong Yi did not answer Lan Ying's question, but turned his head and said to Rayleigh, who was still asleep behind him. And after Gong Yi finished speaking, Rayleigh also sat up. The rope in his hand was untied at some point, and after brushing his beard, he said with a smile, I've been found. Gong Yi didn't say a word, he untied the rope on his hand, moved his hand, and threw a byakug into Rayleigh. They lived together for several years. Rayleigh's little habits, he has basically figured out. You. Lan Ying looked at the two people who stood up, completely confused about the situation. What happened after looking at Lan Ying's astonished look, Gong Yi didn't tease her again and said, your little trick, I've seen it already, but I just want to see what you want to do. Rayleigh also smiled and nodded, indicating that he also understood. In fact, when they first rescued Lan Ying, they already felt that something was wrong. Let's not say that after his slave was taken away, the self-respecting Tianlong people didn't react at all. Gong Yi walked with Lan Ying in his arms for 10 minutes before opening the collar. If the Tianlong people hadn't come out on purpose, the collar would have exploded. Even if everything is a coincidence, why is there not a single person from dock number 49 to dock number 6? The trick of Tianlongren is too obvious. But Lan Ying looked at Gong Yi and Rayleigh and didn't know what to do. We can help you, rescue your mother, and take you two along. Gong Yi looked at Lan Ying and said with a smile. But what Gong Yi said, Lan Ying felt believable. But Lan couldn't believe that Gong Yi was willing to help herself, but she just killed Rayleigh and Gong Yi. But Gong Yi didn't care about those. Just replied with a smile, help people to the end. In fact, Gong Yi is very loyal, although he was deceived by Lan Ying, but Lan Ying is not sincere. For his own mother, there is nothing wrong, so Gong Yi doesn't hate Lan Ying, nor does he blame Lan Ying. Lan Ying looked at Gong Yi and Rayleigh, and nodded moved. It turned out that the gods will really come. Their 10-year slave life finally coming to an end. Then, it's time to go out. Seeing Lan Ying nodding, Gong Yi smiled and moved his body before walking to the cage. Gong Yi tried to touch the cage. Then he smiled contentedly. Seems that it is neither made by Heilushi nor has any mechanism. Keep them locked in such an ordinary cage. I underestimate him, Gong Yi. Anyway, he is also a pirate with a bounty of 150 million. However, when Gong Yi tried to open the cage, he found that no matter how hard there was no reaction in this cage. Even if Gong Yi used armament hockey, he couldn't open the cage. It can't be opened. This is the toughest iron in the world, and it also has a layer of armament hockey. You think the dragon people can use ordinary cages to hold slaves? Rayleigh looked at Gong Yi, who was busy, and said. This cage, when he came in, Rayleigh saw that it was not a simple cage. Until now, he did not understand the structure of this cage. What to do then? Gong Yi was instantly stunned when he heard Rayleigh's words, with a look of confusion on his face. He had never seen such a tough iron. Since Rayleigh said that this is the toughest iron in the world, it must be, coupled with armament hockey, it is naturally extremely tough. This kind of iron can only be damaged by first burning it with fire, and then pouring it over with cold water. Riley replied without being rude. Although Raleigh is old, he still loves reading books. This kind of iron, he has seen many times in books, and his memory is still very clear. But after Rayleigh finished speaking, Gong Yi was stunned. This kind of place, where do you go to find water and fire? There is water. After a while, the people under the Tianlong people will come to bring us water and food, and the water given is 1 bowl per person. Enough to get people out. Just when Rayleigh asked for water, Lan Ying replied. Because Lan Ying has been here for 10 years, he knows the rules of Tianlong people. After all, the Tianlong people will not let their slaves starve to death. Although the things given are not very good, it is still able to fill the stomach. Tianlong people are reluctant to let their toys break before they have been played, and they have to play at least once. 891. Strategies, third more. 4. Water. Gong Yi doesn't think it's a difficult thing. After all, everyone needs to drink water. But the most embarrassing thing is the fire. This place, not to mention the humidity, is also dark, and it is almost impossible to find fire. That, in the case of fire, I have. Just when Gong Yi was thinking about what to do, a voice suddenly came from the cage next to him. After hearing the man's voice, Gong Yi's eyes lit up instantly and looked over there. You have fire. When Gong Yi spoke, he was inevitably a little excited. His luck is so good, he can do whatever he wants, it's just. God helps him too. I am a person with the ability to eat the explosive fruit and can make an explosion. The voice on the other side of the cage continued to answer. Explosive fruit, like its name, can explode, and all types can be used. Since it can explode, there will naturally be fire. After all, explosions rely exclusively on fire to explode. It's useless. They are all wearing Heilushi's handcuffs, and those who are capable can't use their abilities at all. Just when Gong Yi was about to let that person use his abilities, Lan Ying, who was beside him, suddenly spoke up. Tianlong people are very high-level existences, and Heilushi naturally also has them. When they arrested those people used their abilities out of fear. It is capable or not, Tianlong people naturally know. If the ability is caught, it is natural to bring Shanghai Lushi's handcuffs to avoid disaster. Even the cage that the man was in was made of Heilu stone. But Heilu stone is mainly used by the Navy to catch pirates, and the Tianlong people are also limited here, so naturally they are only put in by dangerous elements. In the 2 close encounters between Gong Yi and the Tianlong people, he did not use the fruit ability, and completely relied on domineering. Tianlong people naturally thought that Gong Yi and Rayleigh were incompetent, so they threw them in ordinary cages. Try to see if you can reach me. Gong Yi stretched his hand out of the cage and said to the man. The man looked at Gong Yi's hand, unable to understand Gong Yi's thoughts. His eyes were full of doubts. Don't linger, come over, there's time. Seeing that the man was still there, Gong Yi said helplessly in a trance. Although the man didn't understand what Gong Yi was going to do, he still tried to hold his hand. But the gap in the cage is pitifully small. As long as the person stretches out his hand, he can touch the cage. The cage is made of Halu stone, and it is suspected that it will not work. No matter how hard the man tried, he couldn't reach Gong Yi's hand, even though the distance was not long. After a few tries, Gong Yi gave up too. The man really couldn't use his strength. Immediately, the man withdrew his hand and sat on the ground without speaking. Gong Yi sighed and started thinking about what to do now. After a while, Gong Yi had an idea and said, "Can you think of a way to get out of the cage? Even if the guards take you out, as long as you can pass me, that's fine. Although that person is carrying the Halu stone, it doesn't matter, as long as he can touch that person, he can copy the ability. I'll try it, but I have a request." The man looked at Gong Yi with a slight hesitation in his eyes, and said to Gong Yi. "What request?" Gong Yi looked at the man, and could guess a little bit about that man's thoughts. "Please take us out." The man looked at Gong Yi with a firm tone, not polite at all. Although the man knew that it was impossible to escape the palms of the Tianlong people, he still wanted to try. He wants Gong Yi to take him out too. If he fails, he would rather die than continue to endure humiliation. "Okay, Gong Yi, do what I say, and I will definitely take you out." Gong Yi smiled, he guessed right, and then agreed. Originally, Gong Yi was planning to take the Tianlongren's cell in one nest, and then run out with everyone. Although there are a lot of people, it is a bit laborious to clean the collar, but as long as it is caught before it is discovered, it will be too late. There was no frivolity in Gong Yi's tone, and the man chose to believe Gong Yi's words, and then looked outside. "Master Guard, I want to make it easier, okay?" Next, the man yelled at the door. Because this is the only way to let him reach Gong Yi. "Why so many things? Solve it on the spot." Guard came in and looked at the man with disgust, and impatience in his tone. There are so many things to do with a domestic animal, and the guards are naturally unwilling. But how unsanitary it is here. Seeing that the guard didn't allow it, the man smiled awkwardly and said, "What hygiene do livestock need? It's good to keep you alive." The guard was naturally even more disdainful of that person's statement, and even humiliated him verbally. In the eyes of the guards, it is also a domestic animal, and it does not matter if it does not need to be treated well. Anyway, he can take these. People who are even more humble than him get angry. Although he is said to be a guard, he also wears a collar. It can be said that he is also a slave, but one level higher than those people, because he successfully pleases the woman of the Dragon Man. 892. Escape. But, seeing the guard insulting him, the man was not happy, but he still bit Kiba and wanted to say something. But before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted. "But why go back and be quiet? It's convenient for him to go out. I don't want to live in a prison full of smells, otherwise I'll go and report to Lord Tianlong." Just when that person was completely helpless, Lan Ying said to the guard. After Lan Ying spoke, there was obvious hesitation and reluctance in the guard's eyes. "Why didn't you hear what I said?" Lan Ying looked at the disobedient guard. Her tone rose a tune, as if she was about to lose her temper. In fact, Lan Ying is more favored than the guard. After all, she is the bait used by the Tianlong people to shave other slaves, so she is naturally more useful than a guard. So even though Lan Ying was in the cage, the guards didn't dare to neglect her. In everything, try to rely on her as much as possible. After all, there is no good fruit to eat if you offend. You are responsible for running away. Guard frowned slightly, although he was talking back to Lan Ying, his tone was still a little weaker than before. Guard dared to talk back, of course, because he was afraid that the man would run away, and if he ran away, the responsibility rested with him. Such a big Halu stone handcuff, you can treat him as a god, or you can help him clean the cage. Lan Ying's tone was a little more impatient and a little arrogant. I know, let's solve it quickly. Helpless, the guard went to the man's cage, let the man out, tied it up and pushed him forward. Seeing that the man had succeeded, he nodded with a naive smile, and then followed the guard to leave. By Gong Yi's place where the guards were not paying attention. Gong Yi also stretched out his hand quickly, tapped the man's bare feet with his fingertips, chuckled lightly, and then made a gesture to Lan Ying. Hey, hurry up and bring in the water after you send the person back, I want water. Lan Ying shouted in the cage. Because she knew that the guard would definitely hear it, so she didn't panic. I know. Guard was speechless and answered impatiently. Sooner or later, he will make Lan Ying look good. After a while, the guard brought the man back from outside and locked him up again. Enough is enough. Guard looked at Lan Ying and said with disgust. Lan Ying nodded and said nothing. When the guard was leaving, he muttered, drink you to death. But the guard didn't know whether he died, his malicious pots of water gave Gong Yi a chance. So much water is completely enough. Let's start, teacher, in a while. I'll go and help them unlock the lock, and the guard will be handed over to you. Gong Yi looked at the water and Rayleigh in front of him and said. Rayleigh stroked his beard, nodded with a smile, and continued to sit in place. Next, it's time for Gong Yi's performance. Gong Yi stretched out his hand, and his fingers were able to make crackling sparks, and the dark cage instantly lit up. But seeing this scene, the one who was most shocked was the person who was just touched by Gong Yi. This ability is not exactly why Gong Yi can use the ability to copy the fruit. I am also an ability person. Gong Yi smiled and answered the questioning look in the man's eyes. Gong Yi's words answered everyone's questions, nodded, and then stopped talking, letting Gong Yi concentrate on getting the cage. Afterwards, Gong Yi only used a small explosion to prevent it from being too loud and being detected prematurely. Although there is a sound, it is only a muffled sound, and it can burn the iron with fire. That's good. After being roasted by the fire, the cage began to change color. The original dark black gradually turned into dark blue, and when the entire door turned dark blue, Gong Yi took the kettle and started pouring water from top to bottom. After the water was finished, the dark blue cage gradually began to crack, and there was a small sound. Seeing the changes in the cage, Gong Yi chuckled, then threw the water bottle on the ground and smashed the cage with a punch. The brittle cage couldn't bear Gong Yi's fist at all, and it shattered in an instant, making a loud noise. What are you doing? After the cage sounded, it naturally attracted the guards, but the guards fainted when they saw this scene before they finished speaking. It was Rayleigh's work. Although he knew Rayleigh's background, no matter how many times he watched it, he still couldn't stop the sigh and surprise from the bottom of his heart. After the guard fell, Rayleigh sat on the ground, threw the key of the cage to Gong Yi, and began to sit and drink again. Gong Yi took the key and started to open the door for the rest. Long for their cages to be opened by Gong Yi, and everyone came out of the cages. It's useless. You can't get rid of this circle. No matter how far you run, you will die. Just when Gong Yi was about to find a way to run, a man sat down on the ground decadently and said. When the man said this, almost everyone's hopes were instantly dashed. Yes, how could they forget, and this collar binds them, if it is not for the permission of the Tianlong people, they will not be able to be free in this life. And how could the Tianlong people let them go is undoubtedly impossible. 893. Looking for blue feather. And just when Gong Yi was about to say something, Rayleigh first took off his collar, threw it on the ground, and then said, it's just a collar, why panic? After Rayleigh's collar fell to the ground, everyone's eyes became surprised. The collar that has bound them for a long time has been dismantled and has not exploded. What are you afraid of? Get up, take it apart and run. Rayleigh walked to Gong Yi's side, looked at the frightened people, and said. At this moment, Rayleigh, like a sun illuminating everyone's gloomy world, once again gave them hope. For the next 10 minutes, everyone scrambled to get Rayleigh to remove the collar. Rayleigh was neither angry nor angry, and took off the collar calmly. After everyone's collars were on the ground, Rayleigh untied Gong Yi and Lan Ying. In the cage have regained their freedom. 2 Halushi's handcuffs is there, and the Halushi on the capable person has also been opened. But after regaining their freedom, everyone still dared not walk around. Eventually they looked at each other and decided to go with Gong Yi. This is the Tianlong people's territory, maybe they will be discovered, arrested, and returned. If they were caught again, it would definitely be many times worse than now. Thinking of this, everyone agreed that it was safer to follow Rayleigh and Gong Yi. Lan Ying, can you find your mother's location? After thinking about it, Gong Yi asked Lan Ying. To save Lan Ying's mother, he can only provide some help, and the rest depends on Lan Ying herself. After all, Gong Yi had never met Lan Ying's mother, nor was he familiar with it. I don't know, I haven't seen my mother for a long time. Lan Ying shook her head, a little disappointed. Since half a year ago, the Tianlong people have suddenly changed their temper and no longer let her see their mother no matter what. No matter how she asks, she won't let it. It is even more difficult to find Lan Yu's position. It doesn't matter, look for it slowly, if you are with me, then follow me closely, but you'd better not lose it, and don't make too much noise, there is no second chance for you to come out. Gong Yi sighed, comforted Lan Yu, and decided to find Lan Yu's location in the entire castle. Then, Gong Yi turned around again. To those. When everyone saw that Gong Yi was willing to take them away, they immediately nodded happily, promising not to cause Gong Yi any trouble. After discussing it, they blocked the guard's mouth, tied it up, and threw it into the cage. They were sure and certain that if no one came to rescue him, the guards would never have escaped on their own. This will prevent him from waking up and complaining. Next, Lan Ying led the way, Gong Yi followed behind Lan Ying, those people followed Gong Yi, and Rayleigh was at the end. These people, if you count them carefully, there are not too many people, and it is a little difficult to escape safely. Tianlong people are born hypocritical, there are many servants and slaves, and the castle is naturally not empty. Just walking down one corridor, they could barely move an inch, and were almost spotted several times. Lan Ying followed her memory and walked through the entire castle. But half an hour later, she couldn't find her mother. Coupled with the abnormal state of the Tianlong people, she seemed to understand something for a while, but she was not sure. Just when a few people advanced to the second floor of the castle, they felt that something was wrong. Gong Yi thought that there were only more slaves and servants in the Tianlong people's castle. But they never thought that there would be a navy here, or a lieutenant general. Although these navy ants did no harm to him, if he attracted other people, it would not be very good. Outnumbered, he couldn't possibly match hundreds of people. After all, physical strength is limited. The second floor was also searched by them, but they still didn't see Lan Ying's mother. Girl, is your mother really here? She wasn't locked in a cage. I'm afraid she has already been killed by the Tianlong people. The person behind stood there, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and breathed heavily. When the man finished speaking, Lan Ying stopped and just stood silently. If you want me to say, we should leave first, and then go up is not very good. Seeing Lan Ying's silence, the man thought that his words had worked, so he continued to speak relentlessly. If Lan Ying nodded, they could leave now. So the point is not to persuade Gong Yi, but to persuade Lan Ying. Now they will appear here, all to help Lan Ying find her mother, but they can't find it. Impossible, If you have to go, you can go by yourself, my mother will be fine. Lan Ying turned her head back, her eyes were full of anger, and she obviously hated others to say such things. Their mother and daughter have been supported by the Tianlong people for so long. If they don't rescue their mother, they will leave by themselves. This is not very disappointing. Lan Ying's mother came here to protect Lan Ying. If there is a chance to leave, Lan Ying will leave. So abandon the blue feather. Lan Ying's heart told himself that if he did this, he would regret it for the rest of his life. 894. The fact that I don't want to accept. Stop arguing, you can leave if you don't want to continue. Lan Ying, keep walking, find your mother, and we'll leave. Gong Yi stepped forward and patted Lan Ying's head, comforting her softly. Lan Ying was moved when she saw that Gong Yi was still willing to help her. After she made up her mind to find her mother, she nodded and continued to walk forward. Gradually, they walked from the underground cage to the top floor, but they didn't even see Lan Yu's shadow. Got to the top floor, Lan Ying sat on the ground and couldn't believe it. Her mother is not here, the only possibility is that she is no longer alive. He doesn't believe that the Tianlong people will kindly let her mother go. It's been a long time for you, livestock. Just when Gong Yi was about to continue searching with Lan Ying, the Tianlong people appeared in front of them. Gong Yi was slightly stunned, but unexpectedly he was discovered. When did we find out? Gong Yi 320 stood in front of Lan Ying, protecting Lan Ying, and asked Tianlongren. I found out long ago, otherwise you thought you could come up so easily. Who answered Gong Yi's question was not from Tianlong, but Momotaro. That's right, it's the Admiral of the Admiralty. Gong Yi almost forgot that if he beat the Tianlong people, he would provoke a bunch of warships and admirals. But Gong Yi did not expect that the general who came was Momotaro. One of the main culprits who scattered Luffy and his buddies in the Chambord archipelago. Where is Lan Ying's mother? Gong Yi ignored Momotaro, stared at the dragon man and asked, his voice full of anger. Although this is the Admiral, Gong Yi is not particularly afraid. Her mother died 6 months ago. The Tianlong people looked at Lan Ying, took a breath, and said. Now he has no interest in continuing to keep Lan Ying at all. The Admiral is here, what else does Lan Ying need? What? You lied. Lan Ying heard the words of the Tianlong people and couldn't believe it was true. Her eyes were full of disbelief, as if everything was fake. Your mother died right in front of my eyes. I didn't expect that she just drowned in the water for a few minutes and couldn't hold on. Before she died, she begged me to let you go. It was really fun. Tianlongren said, recalling the embarrassed appearance of Lan Yu at that time, and smiled stupidly. They are Tianlong people who take the pleasure of bullying the commoners, and watching them die in front of their eyes is undoubtedly a pleasure. Shut up. Lan Ying couldn't bear this any longer, her eyes were full of tears, and she was about to rush over to fight the Tianlong people. But his petite body was undoubtedly captured by Momotaro. Lan Ying, who was photographed back, sat on the ground and couldn't stop falling, her mind was full of bits and pieces with Lan Yu. Her mother eventually died. They have survived for 10 years, just a little bit before they are free. Ah! Lan Ying couldn't accept this fact, hugged her head and started to cry. Now she has no image at all. A child who lost his mother was crying loudly. Despite the current environmental crisis, they still feel sorry for Lan Ying. Although they were caught here, at least their families are safe. But Lan Ying's mother has already encountered an accident. Why are you crying? It's so noisy. Looking at Lan Ying who was crying, Tianlongren impatiently took out his gun, ready to shoot. Although he had not recovered from the injury he was beaten by Gong Yi, he was not afraid at all. After all, the person in front of him was the Admiral of the Navy. Therefore, the Tianlong people believe that they are absolutely safe. Hearing the words of the Tianlong people, Momotaro frowned slightly, and did not move or speak. So, she hates it. Come down and help the dragon people. Relying on one's own life experience and not treating people as human beings, people were really disappointed. Moreover, their navy, which should have maintained the existence of justice at sea, is helping the disgusting Tianlong people and oppressing justice at this moment. Is completely contrary to her own justice. Because I am an admiral, I have to do this. On the other side, Rayleigh stopped smiling, the corners of his mouth slowly lowered, and he said nothing. Gong Yi too, looking at Lan Ying crying and listening to Tianlong people's wild laughter, he couldn't help his anger. He took the bullet from the Tianlong people and smashed it to pieces. The bullet turned into powder and fell to the ground and scattered with the wind. Your existence is really inferior to pigs and dogs, beasts. Gong Yi looked at Tianlongren with dark eyes, this time he was really angry. What did you say? You, and you, go, arrest him for me, or what's the use of asking you to come? Gong Yi is a beast, the Tianlong people instantly became angry. But he couldn't beat Gong Yi, and he wouldn't be so stupid as to be soft and hard. He immediately pointed to Momotaro in front of him and asked him to catch Gong Yi. Momotaro didn't say a word, and rushed over in a sloppy manner. She didn't want to help the Tianlong people at all, she was just pretending. She couldn't stand the existence of such a person. For a while, Momotaro really hoped that Gong Yi could do something to the Tianlong people. 895, Helpless, 3rd. Gong Yi was dealing with Momotaro's attack, and he could feel that Momotaro's attack was not forceful at all. Of Navy, so he naturally misunderstood that Momotaro was looking down on him, and his eyes were a little dissatisfied. He, Gong Yi, is also the 12th supernova, so he is so disdainful to think about it with himself. After all, he still has to save those people. Thinking of this, Gong Yi's gaze also skipped the people behind, who were hiding aside because of fear. He didn't dare to use all his strength, for fear of hurting innocent people. Small blast. Gong Yi had no choice but to try his best to control his attack not to have too much range. Small blasting would be the most suitable. However, an explosion of this magnitude could not hurt Momotaro. That's a real admiral. An attack of this magnitude won't hurt me. Momotaro patted the dust on his body and was not hurt at all. Seeing Momotaro's motionless appearance, Gong Yi didn't. Van began to frown, it seemed to be a little troublesome now. It's my turn. Momotaro smiled and said. Although he said he didn't really want to attack Gong Yi, an order was an order. Afterwards, Momotaro used his domineering arrogance, his arm instantly turned the color of steel, and he hit Gong Yi. The Navy, as long as people with a little ability, basically know the 6th form, not to mention the Admiral of the Navy. Momotaro's, shave, and moon steps. All are skilled. The moment of calling Gong Yi, almost no one could be seen. Gong Yi looked at Momotaro, who had disappeared, and was a little overwhelmed for a while. He just looked around, trying to find Momotaro's figure, and then go to defend Momotaro's attack. However, things didn't go as smoothly as Gong Yi thought, and he couldn't find Momotaro at all. Next second, Gong Yi could clearly feel a pain in his back, which was Momotaro's attack. For a while, Gong Yi was photographed flying to the blue edge, and Lan Ying was still, crying, unable to accept the fact that his mother had died. But after Gong Yi was injured, she stopped her tears as soon as possible and went over to Gong Yi. Gong Yi shook his head and signaled to Lan Ying that he was fine. Lan Ying's mood is so chaotic now, he can understand the feeling of losing his family, and he doesn't want Lan Ying to worry anymore. In fact, if he doesn't need to worry about the rest of the people, Gong Yi can completely let himself escape. But if he wants to start a war with the Admiral, Gong Yi has absolutely no chance of winning. Although Gong Yi's strength is very strong now, it is still very difficult to face the Admiral of the Navy. Gong Yi's actual combat ability is not too much, and his fruit ability is not too strong. Copying the fruit, in other words, if the powerful enemy deliberately does not let you touch, or if there is no ability at all, then Gong Yi is 100% at a disadvantage. Fruits with strong attack power, like rubber fruits, burnt fruits, are not very common. Moreover, the copied abilities are all new abilities, and it is impossible to use them freely. Just like when he was advancing the city and using the speed of the Lieutenant General, he almost failed several times. As for the ability of Luffy and the ability of Luffy, because he understands it very well, so he can control it better. But if he encounters an ability he doesn't understand at all, if he faces a powerful enemy at that time, then he can be said to be dead. Without the fruit ability, it would still be difficult to deal with the ability person, and his domineering is not very powerful. After this battle, Gong Yi should really think about what to do next. Gong Yi, let me come. Just when Gong Yi and Momotaro were confronting, Rayleigh suddenly came out from behind and said. His expression was still squinting and smiling, nothing changed. But, teacher. Gong Yi looked at Riley and wanted to say something, but didn't know what to say. Gong Yi doesn't want to give up here, he is the one who wants to be the Pirate King, how could he choose to end here? It's still too early for you, don't force it, do you want Buffy to step back? Rayleigh naturally saw Gong Yi's attitude of rejecting it. For a while, Rayleigh's expression lost his smile, he opened his eyes and looked at Gong Yi, a little more solemn. Rayleigh's words made Gong Yi choked on the spot, unable to say anything for a while. My mind, I was full of the fate of Luffy and others in the Chambord Islands and the generals. If we lose this time, the people who want to follow Luffy's footsteps, and those innocent people. Those people were just caught, ordinary people who came here, and shouldn't be implicated with him. Thinking of this, Gong Yi punched the ground and said nothing. He is so annoying. Hate it. Useless yourself now. Afterwards, Gong Yi nodded and agreed to let Rayleigh deal with the general. At the same time, Gong Yi also swore that after this time, he must become stronger. Please download Fei Lu's novel. See the latest chapter on Baidu. Search 99 Playmates looking for 99 novels. 896. Rayleigh vs. Momotaro. After convincing Gong Yi, Rayleigh nodded and stood in front of Gong Yi, fully prepared for the battle. It's rare for the deputy head of the dignified Roger Pirates to come forward for the sake of the kid. Momotaro said with a chuckle after seeing Rayleigh. But Rayleigh didn't say anything, just continued to narrow his eyes and chuckle, as if he didn't hear what Momotaro said, and didn't give Momotaro any face. Tisk, ignore me. Momotaro was silent for a while, his face darkened, he was ignored. There are so many people here, and he is a dignified admiral, so he was ignored by others. Naturally, Momotaro couldn't swallow this breath. Is there so much nonsense in the current navy? Rayleigh opened his eyes and looked at Momotaro. He lost the smile he had before, and there was still some anger in his eyes. It is estimated that it was because his closed child was bullied, so he was very angry. When Rayleigh said this, Momotaro was instantly embarrassed and speechless, and could only be dissatisfied with, tisk. With a sound. After that, Momotaro once again put domineering on his arm and hit Rayleigh, the same way he attacked Gong Yi. Momotaro just jumped up and was caught up by Rayleigh. Momotaro's ability to teleport in Gong Yi's eyes was almost as slow as a snail when he reached Rayleigh. After a while, Momotaro turned around and punched Rayleigh behind him with a fist. But Momotaro's punch was directly picked up by Rayleigh, and it was only a punch. After receiving Momotaro's attack, Rayleigh didn't forget to give Momotaro a slap. Momotaro didn't expect Rayleigh's jong suddenly attacked his stomach. For a while, Momotaro was helpless to his stomach and clenched Kiba. It's unclear at this time, and Momotaro also suffered. Momotaro still underestimated Rayleigh because of his age. Although Rayleigh is the deputy head of the Roger Pirates, but after so many years, I'm afraid I don't know how to fight. But Momotaro didn't expect that Rayleigh, at this age, could easily slap himself away. In the end, Momotaro looked down on Rayleigh too much. This is the deputy captain of the Roger Pirates. Even if he is old, his power will not decrease. But this fight brought back the time when Rayleigh and Roger had adventures together, and they, too, continued to accept those who underestimated themselves. The friendship between the two people is not single, and the matter has come to this point, he actually misses that period of time. Don't be in a daze, this is a battle. Just when Rayleigh was thinking about Roger, Momotaro suddenly rushed over. Momotaro also knew that Rayleigh was in a daze, and wanted to take advantage of Rayleigh's daze to solve Rayleigh. But unlike what he expected, even though Rayleigh was distracted for a while, he was still able to solve him the moment he returned from his distraction. Rayleigh's confrontation with Momotaro is as easy as Momotaro's confrontation with Gongyi. At this moment, for some unknown reason, Gongyi suddenly thinks of Gall Roger. Looking at Rayleigh's strength, Roger's strength naturally made him very curious. How did Roger conquer this great route and how he became the Pirate King, all of which made him full of curiosity. While he was wandering, Rayleigh and Momotaro entered into the next round of confrontation. Although Momotaro used all his strength, he still couldn't dodge the 3 moves under Rayleigh. It was only at the beginning that he was lucky enough to escape an attack by Rayleigh. But after the protracted battle, Momotaro naturally lost more and more to Rayleigh. Damn! Momotaro supported the ground with his weapon, panting heavily, his heart full of dissatisfaction. Momotaro didn't believe that he was a dignified admiral who couldn't beat a man who stepped into the coffin with half a foot. You can't beat me. Rayleigh continued to narrow his eyes, chuckled lightly, then jumped up and hit Momotaro at his fastest speed. Now Momotaro, like Gongyi just now, desperately wants to dodge, but can't see Rayleigh. Next second, Momotaro was also slapped to the ground by Gongyi's slap. Discerning eye can see that Rayleigh is repeating what Momotaro just did. In other words, just avenge Gongyi. Looking at Rayleigh, Gongyi was overwhelmed with emotion, and at the same time despised his weak self. He also did not expect that Rayleigh was so protective of the calf. Ah, die! Being so humiliated by Rayleigh, Momotaro, as a naval admiral, naturally couldn't stand it. Momotaro began to be covered with domineering, like an Iron Man. Looking at Momotaro, Gongyi understood that he was completely irritated by Rayleigh, and it could be said that he lost his mind. Having lost his mind, he is more flawed than before, and his anger has indeed stimulated his full potential. At the same time, it also stimulated all the loopholes of Momotaro, just like a person with only violent power and no evasion ability. 897. A critical moment. Looking at the violent Momotaro, Rayleigh frowned slightly. Although he said that he was slow and huge, his strength should not be underestimated. Just as Rayleigh was thinking, Momotaro suddenly stretched out his palm and patted it. Rayleigh dodged quickly, but the floor on this floor was directly collapsed, and things downstairs could be seen. Seeing the power of Momotaro's palm, Rayleigh couldn't help but sigh that the power was huge, but he still couldn't beat him. However, in the next second, what happened was unbelievable. I saw Momotaro was kicked down by Rayleigh, and when he stood up again, he directly attacked the Tianlong people on the side. Seeing this scene, not only Gongyi, but even Rayleigh was surprised. Why did they start killing each other all of a sudden? The Tianlong brothers and sisters did not escape. They were photographed directly downstairs, and the sister was almost in a state of fainting, her face full of faces as blood. You dare! Tenryu raised his hand with difficulty to point at Momotaro, but before he could fully lift his hand, he fell down, and there was no sound. Gongyi knew that the Tianlong people had lost their minds. A while, Gongyi didn't. Ban felt sad for Momotaro. He was originally sent to arrest himself and protect the Tianlong people, but he did not expect to hurt the Tianlong people in the end, presumably because he couldn't eat Kabuto and walked away. Even if you can survive, you can't escape the crime. Teacher, let's fight quickly, some people have begun to pay attention to this side. Just when Gongyi was in a daze, he suddenly saw a navy who was still outside talking to another navy. Conversation between the two was over. A navy trotted out of here, leaving the man to continue to observe the palace of the Dragon Man. Discerning eye can see that the Navy has already reported it, and if it is not resolved quickly, the consequences will be disastrous. Rayleigh did not speak, but extended his hand and gave Gong Yi a thumbs up, implying that Gong Yi did a good job, and then continued to entangle with Momotaro. With Gong Yi's words, Rayleigh changed his attack method, no longer just dodging, but attacking first. I saw Lei used armament hockey, turned his hands and feet into the color of steel, and then rushed straight to Momotaro. In the process of hitting this move, it was almost all wind, and it almost didn't blow them away. Fortunately, Gong Yi shot down a wall with the ability to explode fruit, helping them escape. Thank you. After that, the fruit's ability person saw that Gong Yi was able to use his ability, smiled happily, and didn't forget to say thank you. To be honest, that person is still very happy that his ability can come in handy here. It's all right. Gong Yi shook his head and said it was okay, then hid behind the stone and continued to watch the situation on Rayleigh and Momotaro's side. I saw that after Rayleigh punched down, Momotaro was directly knocked to the ground by Rayleigh. Because Momotaro's current size is incomparably large, when he fell, he collapsed into a piece of the ground. After this series of turmoil, the ground on the first floor of the Heavenly Dragon Palace finally collapsed. Along with the collapsed floor, several people fell to the ground floor, where they just escaped from the cage. The guard had just woken up from the noise, but before he could see what was going on in front of him, a stone fell from the sky, causing him to faint again. However, what should be most worried now should be Lan Ying and others. They are all people who can't land on their own. What should I do at this moment? Just when everyone was ready to die, a voice suddenly sounded. That's right, it was Meyer who came. And in the next second, an extra large cushion appeared under everyone's body, which was enough for everyone to land safely. In Meyer's observation, after everyone fell down, another spell came out. All the stone residues turned into sculptures and appeared beside Meyer. In this way, everyone can be considered to have survived 9 deaths. Everyone, is everything okay? After reaching the bottom, Gong Yi took the lead to land steadily, and then looked around worriedly. It's okay. Lan Ying sat up from the mat, rubbed her head, and reluctantly replied, and everyone else agreed. The next moment, Meyer jumped down from above, landed with ease, looked at Gong Yi, and said, it's okay. Gong Yi shook his head and said he was fine, but couldn't understand why Meyer was here. When I went back to find you after purchasing, I heard about what happened here, and I rushed over. I happened to meet a small team of the Navy, and came over after the solution was settled. I almost caught up with it. Knowing that Akatsuki Gong Yi was wondering, Meyer explained to Gong Yi what was going on. Hearing this, Gong Yi nodded and thanked him. If it wasn't for Meyer, this time would be dangerous. Meyer shook his head, expressing no thanks. It is right to do things for the captain. 898. Painful Tianlong people, second more. Looking at Meyer, who was smirking, Gong Yi also smiled, which seemed to be a near miss. Speaking of which, what's going on? How did you get caught here to say good things to Bai? What happened? After resolving the immediate crisis, Meyer punched Gong Yi in the head again and asked. 2 of them agreed to go shopping, and then went back to build the ship after purchasing. How could they provoke the Tianlong people inexplicably, and they were arrested? It's a long story, in fact. Seeing Meyer's confused state, Gong Yi scratched his head and smiled, then explained it to Meyer. After listening, Meyer sighed. It was indeed Gong Yi's style. Speaking of which, we can't stay here for a long time. There may be a new general coming down soon. Let's go back to dock number 49 first. Gong Yi reacted instantly, and then said to the crowd. Lan Ying and the others nodded, and Rayleigh also nodded, and the group prepared to leave quickly. After all, this is in the Holy Land, and the Admiral is not far from them. But on the way to leave, Lan Ying's mood is still very complicated, and she doesn't want to accept the truth. Just when Lan Ying was thinking about the things in her heart, she passed by Tianlongren for a while. Looking at her two mother-killing enemies on the ground, Lan Ying's anger and resentment instantly reached a certain level, and then, amid the doubts of the crowd, she squatted down, and began to fight according to the faces of the two heavenly dragons. The two Tianlong people were beaten with blood all over their faces. Lan Ying still didn't give up and continued to beat, and everyone did not stop. Although he knew that the admiral could be here anytime, anywhere, he remained silent and waited for Lan Ying to finish venting. They know how much Lan Ying hates Tianlong people, and they also hate Tianlong people, so naturally they won't go up to stop them. It wasn't until Lan Ying was out of breath and couldn't move that she got off the body of the Tianlongren and walked to Gong Yi's side. Let's go. Lan Ying stopped looking at the two heavenly dragons, stood behind Gong Yi, and said. Gong Yi nodded, then stretched out his hand and rubbed Lan Ying's head, and the group left the Tianlongren's palace. By the time Admiral Kizaru arrived here, Gong Yi and his party had already left. The helpless Kizaru had no choice but to return to the base with Momota and the two seriously injured Tianlong people. After Gong Yi and the others returned to dock number 49, Rayleigh asked Shachi to take out some of the food she had stored. Those who have been imprisoned by the Tianlong people can finally have a good meal. Just now, they are in the cage, and now they are free, although this is true, but they still can't restrain their excitement. Everyone is the same, eating delicious food, tears gradually slipping from the eyes. If it wasn't for Gong Yi, they'd probably have someone dead in it by now. For Gong Yi's gratitude, more than a thank you can say clearly. And in the naval base at this moment. Damn, what kind of admiral of yours, let him get out. The Tianlong people here, just woke up, the whole ward began to scream. Was going to help him catch Gong Yi, but Gong Yi didn't catch him, so he hurt himself like this. By Momotaro was actually not too serious, but it was only after Lan Ying's pile of fists that they were seriously injured. Nahi, they were all in a coma at that time. Naturally they didn't know what happened, they only knew that they were injured. Besides, even if he knew what happened, he wouldn't necessarily let Momotaro go. After all, this is because Momotaro didn't catch Gong Yi. Your injuries are just right, you can't get angry, first ensure your own safety. Sengoku gets a headache from these two celestial dragons. However, even he couldn't be unreasonable to the Tianlong people, so he waved his hand to comfort him. We have a distinguished status and suffered such a serious injury, so forget it. How did your navy do things? Sengoku didn't answer his question. The Tenryu became even more angry, and even scolded him. Sengoku didn't say anything at all. In this case, what he could say, he could only wait for the Tianlong people to calm down on their own. Of pirates really gave him a headache, first Luffy, and then Gong Yi, who provoked Akainu and abused Tianlongren. Since Ace and Whitebeard died, these pirates have not stopped, and for a while, Sengoku really began to wonder if what he did was right or wrong. And the place where Momotaro was recovering. You know how troublesome this time is, right? Kizaru looked at Momotaro lying on the bed with injuries all over his body and asked. Momotaro said nothing, just bit Kiba unwillingly. The death penalty can be avoided, and the living crime cannot be escaped. Your position may not be preserved, so be mentally prepared. Seeing that Momotaro didn't speak, Kizaru knew that he couldn't accept this fact. But he still informed him of the possible demotion and left the room. 899. Come with me, third more. After Kasaragi left, Momotaro slammed his fist on the wall. His eyes were full of anger, but his heart was also full of unwillingness and humiliation. Lost to Rayleigh, he was demoted, and now he has to be constantly reprimanded by the Tianlong people. How could he bear it? Besides, the seat of this general has not been warmed up yet, and now he is going to hand it over to others. Gong Yi's hatred naturally took it to a higher level. Gong Yi, you wait for me. Momotaro's eyes were full of obscurity, and he muttered unwillingly. Camera goes back to Gong Yi, sighed. After everyone eats the buns, the next thing to do is to treat their wounds. But for they who know nothing about medical skills, they are completely helpless when they look at their wounds. They also cannot go to the hospital for treatment. After fighting the Tianlong people, they undoubtedly became the figures on the cusp of the storm. Although they were only slaves, they could also be said to be accomplices. When the Navy didn't know what Akatsuki and the others looked like, they thought it was better not to expose themselves. Let me help you with treatment, I know medical skills. Just when everyone knew what was wrong, Lan Ying stood up from the crowd and said. Really? One person asked happily after listening to Lan Ying's words. Seeing how happy they were, Lan Ying nodded, she was indeed good at medicine. The next time is Lan Ying's treatment time. As for the medicinal materials and medical supplies, leave it to Meyer. The range of his materials is not small, the whole Chambord archipelago can be used for his use, and naturally there is no shortage of medicinal materials and bandages. After everyone's wounds were bandaged, Shachi arranged for them to rest in the warehouse at the back. The place in this shop is not big, so I can only make it wrong for them to sleep on the floor, quilts and blankets. Although they still slept on the floor, they were already happy enough. After all, under the constraints of the Tianlong people, they didn't sleep well, and now they can finally take a good rest. Perhaps it was also because the day was too exhausting, except Mayor, Gongyi and Lan, the rest of the people had already fallen into a deep sleep. After everyone fell asleep, Gongyi suddenly remembered something, looked around, but couldn't find the person he was looking for. Afterwards, Gongyi opened the door, walked out, and saw Lan Ying's figure on the side. What are you doing? Just when Gongyi was about to pass, Mayor suddenly appeared beside Gongyi, patted Gongyi and said. Originally, Mayor couldn't sleep and came to see Gongyi, but he didn't expect Gongyi to observe Lan Ying here. Completely misunderstood Gongyi's mind and smiled maliciously. Put normal things in your head. Gongyi looked at Mayor's smile, and naturally understood where he was thinking, then patted him on the forehead and said. Mayor was beaten like this by Gongyi, so he reluctantly closed his mouth, but he still couldn't control his heart. Ah, Gongyi, Mayor, I can't sleep, so I came out for a walk. The sound of Gongyi and Mayor fighting was naturally heard by Lan Ying, and after turning around and looking at it, she said. Well, Lan Ying, I have something to tell you. Gongyi nodded, walked out of the room, looked at Lan Ying, and said. After Gongyi finished speaking, Lan Ying's eyes were full of doubts, not sure what Gongyi was going to say. For Lan Ying's questioning eyes, Gongyi didn't give a shit and said, Lan Ying, be my partner. However, Gongyi's words undoubtedly surprised both Mayor and Lan Ying. Lan Ying never thought that she would also receive an invitation from the pirates. Why me? Although Lan Ying had a lot to say, what she wanted to say most was to ask why it was her. Gongyi didn't hide it, and replied, I want to be the pirate king. There are only two of us in the current pirates. Mayor is the boatman. Lan Ying, would you like to join us as a ship doctor? Gongyi's smile was particularly bright under the moonlight, which made Lan Ying's heart tighten. Wanted to reach out my hand to agree, but I recovered for a moment, withdrew my hand, and said, I'm sorry. After saying that, Lan Ying turned around and didn't look at Gongyi, afraid that she couldn't help but want to go with Gongyi. Why? After being rejected, Gongyi's hand paused, wondering why. Regarding Gongyi's question, Lan Ying bit Kiba, turned her head away, and said, there is no reason. Then come with us. Seeing that Lan Ying had no reason, Gongyi still wanted to take Lan Ying and leave together. I hate it. Pirate, therefore, it is impossible for me to be a pirate with you, give up. Lan Ying saw that Gongyi was not planning to give up, turned around, looked at Gongyi and Mayor, and said. I'll rest first, see you tomorrow. Looking at Gongyi's eyes, Lan Ying's heart was full of mixed feelings, and she didn't want to stay any longer, so she crossed Gongyi and trot back to the house, ready to sleep. But no one saw it. Before Lanying went in, the tears flowing from the corners of her eyes, read the underlined version of the novel. Please download Fei Lu's novel. Read the latest chapter. Baidu search 99 Playmate, find 99 Novel Network and LT, or block the collection of IP. 900. Blue Sakura's past. However, this scene was clearly seen by one person. That's right, this person is the person with the ability to explode the fruit, Rocky. You guys, I want Lanying to go with you. Walked out from the side after Lanying entered the house and asked Gongyi and Mayor. After hearing the sound, Gongyi turned around, and when he saw that it was Rocky, he nodded and said, I want her to be my ship doctor. Lanying, say it, she hates it. Pirates. Rocky saw Gongyi's blue Sakura that I had decided to take away, and said. Seeing that Rocky also said the same, Gongyi's eyes instantly looked at Rocky, a little more puzzled. Rocky's tone, obviously, knows something. Lanying and I were also very good friends when we were in the Tianlong People's Cage, so why does she hate it? Pirates, I also know, but although I say Blue Sakura hates pirate, but as you can see, she doesn't hate it. You guys, Lanying is going to be the wanted target of the Tianlong people now, so it's impossible to be here alone, so please think of a way and take her away. Rocky looked at Gongyi, said solemnly, and then bowed to Gongyi, sincerely hoping that Gongyi could leave with Lanying. I think so too, but I won't push her. Can you tell me she hates it? The reason for the pirates. Gongyi looked at Rocky and wanted to know that Lanying hated. The reason for the pirates. Gongyi doesn't. Stupid, I can naturally see that Lanying wants to go with her, but for some reason, she is trying her best to restrain herself. This happened more than 10 years ago, when Lanying was 3 years old. Rocky sighed, and he didn't intend to hide from Gongyi, and slowly opened Shikai to release the events of the year. 18 years ago. At that time, it was Lanying's mother, when Lanyu had just given birth to Lanying and Lanying's older brother Lanyang. Originally, when Lanying, Lanyu, Lanyang, and Lanyang's father, the Muestalhawk family of 4 lived happily, the names of Lanying and Lanyang were not called this at that time. At that time, Lanying's name was Muestalying, and Lanyang was Muestalyang. However, in the 3rd year of Lanyang and Lanying's birth, an accident happened. A pirate group arrived at the Chambord Islands, which is where Lanying and the others lived. The dock. Out to buy things, the female captain of the Mustard Huo thief fell in love at first sight, which is the so-called Yuhi apricot out of the wall. From this day on, Hawk spent more and more time away from home every day, and became more and more neglectful of Lanyu and the 2 newborn children, and devoted himself to the woman. Rocky sighed along the memory of what Lanying told himself. This is the beginning of the tragedy. Of the female pirate group is very personable. 4. Hawk's sudden pursuit, he did not refuse at all. Until one day, the weak Lanyu realized that something was wrong with Hawk. When Hawk was out, she chose to follow, and happened to see Hawk pursuing the female pirate captain. Lanyu felt his unwillingness, walked out, looked at Hawk, and started a meal, questioning. But men like the new and hate the old, so Hawk was naturally very impatient with Lanyu's questioning. He even beat up Lanyu and called it vexatious. Lanyu was not angry, and went home crying. However, the female pirate, after knowing that Hawk had a family, still did not reject Hawk. 4. Hawk's enthusiastic pursuit, she expressed her willingness to accept, and also said to Hawk that as long as you were willing to abandon the woman, she expressed her willingness to take Hawk on board and go to sea together. Who was seduced by beauty, agreed to the female pirate's request. When he returned home again, Lanyu had a big quarrel with him and wanted to divorce Lanyu. Lanyu was unwilling, so Hawk beat Lanyu, and then forced Lanyu to marry, otherwise he would kill the child. Out of concern for the child, Lanyu agreed to Hawk's unreasonable request. After the two broke off their relationship, Hawk still took 2 children with him. Because this is the request of the female pirate, saying that it is to train his children to be better pirates. Naturally, Lan Yu was unwilling to argue with Hawk again. When the two were arguing, in order to protect Lan Yu, Lan Yang took the initiative to struggle with Hawk and was unwilling to go together. Hawk was bitten by Lan Yang in pain, and he kicked Lan Yang out with 1 kick. Lan Yang, who was kicked and flew out, just bumped his head into the corner of the table and lost his breath on the spot. And Xiao Lanying was so frightened by this scene that she hugged her doll and started crying. Hawk saw that things were not good, and wanted to attack Lan Ying. But Lan Yu desperately protected Lan Ying, and finally left here with Lan Ying, hiding in the Chambord archipelago for a month, and it was not until Hawk left that they returned to a peaceful life. His father was kidnapped by pirates and killed his own brother, which took root in young Lan Ying's heart. Lan Ying knew that it was her father's fault, but if that pirate didn't show up, he wouldn't be ruined. So from then on, Lan Ying hated all the pirates.